Everything is sacred. Everything that has a name. Everything is sacred. Nothing is.
Welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations, Ruth. I'm absolutely tickled, delighted, and happy that you are here. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I finally get you in my kitchen, even though we're a full state away, figuratively and in every other way. You were at my table, so it means so much to me. And
you make great salmon too, I remember. So.
Oh, do you? You've been at my actual table. I'm going to do something I've never done before with a kitchen table conversation guest, and that is I'm going to read something from my book about you. And I thought, okay, so forgive me while I find it. This is Ruth. Ruth is known by many as the single most inquisitive person alive. Her interest in what lies in between the liminal seams of your story may derail you, but she is a master at the art of unpacking the real story. There is a rarity to Ruth. Her candid curiosity is deeply rooted in a sincere intention to understand the very essence of the gift she is excavating. Ruth is a unique example of the saying, look and you shall find. And Ruth is looking for the heart of every story, situation, and place. This quality enables her to manifest the events and initiatives she produces with a depth that is thoughtful and stretches the edges of what is possible for the world, for world peace, like her 2-volume masterpiece, INTERFAITH, the musical. She has been my friend, confidant, truth teller, advisor, and spiritual mentor for, yes, I had to read it. I almost didn't believe it, for about 20 years.
Right.
So.
And the one who encouraged you to write your book.
You encourage is a light word, Ruth. Encourage is a gentle expression.
I knew down and I said, you're not leaving this room until you commit.
I think you had the cattle prods were involved, and you even were throwing me titles for which I can't remember. I don't know if you do.
Well, what about the dog?
Well, what about the dog was the working title because of you. And the story really didn't, I knew I had to pay attention to the story because of you, because of you, and 2 other chapters in my book would not be possible because of you. So you are largely responsible for this. And one thing I do talk about is the importance of paying attention to our allies and our angels, as well as those who may not appear to be so in our lives. But especially you being an angel and a mentor, the way you have shown up in my life, intentionally and unintentionally, like asking me to find you a single rock for your mandala, just set me on an entire vision quest, and is responsible for chapter 5. Yeah, in my book, or no, chapter 8. You're mentioned in 5.
We don't know, Sandy, when we have no idea what the significance of each moment is. And I think that when you start to look at your life retroactively, and I was in a seminar with Jean Houston once, and she had us she gave us a labyrinth drawing, and she had us put in there all the significant moments in our life when we had to make choices, and what we did, what we pursued. And then she said, and if you look at it now, you will see that nothing was unintentional or coincidental. But at the time, you didn't know. But then there's something else, and I guess that's what we're going to talk about today, answering the call.
Yeah.
That is outside of us, it becomes inside us. And that's, I think, what you did. You answered the call. And I know I certainly did several times in my life. I've been thinking about that topic to share with you, because I don't believe it's a once or never kind of arrangement where we're only asked once to do what our self really wants to do. I think it's more than that, but I'm going to let you, I'm the one that's usually asking questions, so I'm going to let you ask me the questions.
Well, one thing I love about kitchen table conversations is we don't have really a format. We have a theme, we have a topic. We want to talk about answering the call because that is really what we both know how to do. And the book is really about paying attention to those invitations, those moments and the spaces in between. And, yes, we can look back in retrospect and see these things that have happened in our lives. And we can see those who brought us these amazing experiences or incidences or circumstances that created that opportunity. But how do we cultivate that skill to look in those spaces in between and to take advantage of that opportunity to pause, to slow down to the speed of awe and wonder about what's going on around us. And as a process of not only first hearing the call, but now which is our moment of choice? How do we respond to it? So I want to know what was going on inside of you when you heard the call that a musical needed to happen. That first, let me just say, you've been an interfaith activist much of your adult life.
Right.
Is that fair to say? Even
more than 30 years. Yeah.
Career in film and all these, these wonderful adventures you've been on. But as I've known you for what you've said, 30 years.
Since 2004 is when we met at the premiere of my film, God and All I Need to Talk. You were in the audience that day. Right. There were 16 different religious communities represented, and there were Congresswoman Diane Watson was there. There were all kinds of dignitaries, but the interfaith community was fully represented, and you were in the audience. And that was the first time we met. We had corresponded, but that was the first time we actually met.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want to tell you about why that event happened too as part of the call.
Well, one of the things I think is so amazing about you, Ruth, is, as interfaith activists, you do community events, you bring together the community, there's dialogues, there are panel discussions, there are conferences, but the arts are really the main line to the heart, right? And you have managed to bring together the world of the arts and this important conversation of interfaith understanding, reconciliation, and community building together in a way that's really significant. So yeah, so what was going on with God and All I Need to Talk?
Okay, well, first, so we'll go back a little before that. So my wake-up call to my call, right, actually happened when I was in college. I was a freshman in college, and I had lived on the campus for just one semester because they let you come in the wintertime when a lot of kids drop out, when they don't make the grades or they don't want to be in college, or, And so I was actually in commuter territory, but I was able to get on campus, and it was in Chicago, and they're pretty, how should I say, frigid winters there. And I was so happy to be there. And then we had a lottery, and everybody took a number, and the number closest to 1 would have first choice of where you could live the next year. And so I picked number 2. And I had 3 prospective roommates. I'm Jewish, and I had 2 Catholic girlfriends and 1 Protestant. We all wanted to room together. And they went to the house mother, and when she asked who are going to be your roommates, they said Ruth. And she said, well, you probably have to choose someone else because she's not going to be allowed to live on campus. They said, what? She told that to all 3 of them. And when it was my turn, and I asked her, I said, look, I have number 2. So I'm like, I get to choose the best place. And she said, well, you won't be able to come back. And I said, why is that? And she said, she got very embarrassed. And she finally said, well, why don't you speak to the head of admissions? So I made an appointment with the head of admissions, and I sat down and I said to him, I don't understand. I said, I have almost a 4-point average. I'm very active in after-school activities. I don't understand why I'm not allowed to come back on campus. So he said, well, why don't you ask your rabbi if he could find a place for you to live? Now, this out of nowhere, this came. And in those days, when you filled out an application for a university, you had to write your religion and you had to send a picture so they could tell your ethnicity if you were African American, for example, or if you were Jewish and you wrote down Jewish so they knew. So I said to him, well, what does my rabbi have to do with this? And he said, well, you know, for dietary reasons and so forth. And that was the moment that I knew that that was anti-Semitism, and it had nothing to do with anything else. It was a rude awakening, Sandy. I had never experienced anything like that in my life. And I left his office, I would say traumatized, and the world changed for me at that moment. And the first thing I did was join the Human Relations Committee on campus, because there was a lot of, I would say, prejudice and discrimination against the Africans who were coming to study, and the people who didn't like to have them in their homes. They were supposed to get home stay. They said because they didn't like the smells of what they were cooking.
Yeah.
Right. So I ended up 2 years later going back and living on campus, but not through the university. But that event was, you know, like the first gong. And then after I graduated as a journalist. And after that, I spent 1.5 years in Latin America. And I was in 19 countries and 54 cities. And I lived with families all over. And I got to see people as people. They were Latin Americans. They spoke Spanish or Portuguese in Brazil, but they were people. I had dinners with them. I interfaced with the kids, with the parents, and I saw, you know, they're like us, the same problems, intergenerational problems, sibling problems, a husband and wife problem. I saw everything was the same. It was just in a different language, right? And of course, there were some cultural mores that were a little bit different, but basically the same thing. And when I came back from Latin America, I had a very heavy accent in English because I'd been speaking Spanish for 1.5 years. And people always asked me what country I was from when I came back to America. And I would say, well, I'm from Chicago. And they'd say, no, like, where were you born? I said, well, I was born in Chicago. And they wouldn't believe me. And so I had culture shock when I came back because I didn't identify with my birth culture. I identified more with the Latin culture. And people had trouble with me because I didn't seem to be the same person any longer. So I ended up going to New York, working for the Associated Press, and then studying film because I just had this feeling as a journalist that I always wanted to take not just a still photo, but, you know, the whole scene. And then I went off to Europe. I was there for 8 months. I lived in Italy. I learned Italian and ended up going to Israel, where I have so much family. And I lived there for almost 10 years. I worked as a documentary filmmaker for Israel Television, and I started meeting Palestinians and working together with groups of people who were interested in having a dialogue. This was in the 70s, right? And this is before I was married. I married an Israeli, my son was born there, and we came back to the States. And then I had a daughter, Leora, and so I was busy being a mother and a wife, but always doing something in film. And the next thing that happened, the next call I received, right? So this is a series of calls moving me in a certain direction that I had no idea I would go to, all right? The next call was in 1991. I decided to make an interfaith Seder, and so many people wanted to come. I had to rent a room, a hall, and have it catered. There were 85 people at the interfaith Seder. And my former husband, Isaac, was so opposed to this. He just didn't understand why I was doing this. Why don't you just have your sister and her family come? Why do you have to have 85 people? And who are these people? They were Christians, and I remember there were some Armenians. At the time, I didn't know any Muslims, but they were all different people. And we sat at the table, and I could see he was not going for this, but I knew I had to do it. And I don't know why, but I said to him, listen, this is so important to me that I can't explain to you why, but I'm called to do this. And I said, don't help me, but don't hurt me. meaning, don't interfere. I'm not going to ask you to do anything. He didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand it. I just knew I had to do it. At that event, people started telling stories of their liberation from oppression. And I had it filmed. And after, when I watched the footage, I thought there must be hundreds of stories out there, Passover stories, not just from Jews, but being liberated from oppression is a universal theme, right? And then people fell out of the woodwork. I met an Ethiopian man who told me I won't go into it now, it's too long, and then I met 2 African-American women who took me to their pastor, who had been celebrating Passover for 6 years with 600 African-Americans going through the entire Seder.
Yeah.
Why? Because for them and their civil rights movement and what they were fighting for was no different than the Israelites who had to leave Egypt. So they just slid right into that story and they got it. And then I filmed the Seder for feminists where Debbie Friedman sang. And then I filmed Seder for Catholic workers, Seder for abused wives, Seder for recovering alcohol, all these Seders. And they were using, again, the Passover template, but it was much more about where they were in their lives. And so I decided I would make a film about that. I decided to make a Passover film. And I filmed about 100 hours. And I was thinking that I was to complete the film, and that was my mission. That was what this whole thing was about, I thought. Until one day, I was in Hollywood. I went to a girlfriend's performance at a theater, and I saw a huge billboard on the corner of Sunset and Hollywood Boulevard that said, God and Allah need to talk.
This is right after 9/11.
Right, this 9/11 was in 2001, right? And this was in 2003, at the beginning of 2003.
Yeah.
And I stopped my car. I was so upset. First I laughed because I thought, and then I thought, this is not funny at all. This means that we've not only divided ourselves, we've divided God.
Yeah.
And I know you also were motivated after 9/11 to start Sarah, the women's group. So it was for you, it got translated into forming a group of Muslims.
Gathering women.
Gathering women.
Mm-hmm.
So I went home and I couldn't think of anything else but that billboard. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, I need to make a film, and it's going to be called God and Allah Need to Talk, because that is what people are thinking right now, that there's a split between God and Allah. There is no split. It's just the Arabic name for God is Allah. And all the Jews who lived in Arab countries for hundreds of years used to call God Allah because they lived where they spoke Arabic, right? So I went back. I couldn't find the billboard any longer, but I tracked down the person who put it up. And I told him I was making a film, and I got permission to use just a still of the photo. And then coincidentally at the same time, Rabbi Stephen Jacobs was organizing a Seder with Dr. Nazir Khaja from the Muslim community. And I went and I filmed it. And it was called a Seder for Reconciliation between Isaac and Ishmael. And it was so moving. And I filmed it all. And I knew what the title was. I didn't know how I was going to use it. But I had to find newspaper clippings about what happened, how the fear and distrust of people right after 9/11, when this Sikh man was killed in Arizona, and FBI, it was just such I guess I could call it an ugly or a tormented time, right? And nobody knew what to do, and nobody knew how to resolve it. And usually when I've worked on documentary films, they take anywhere between 2 to 4 years doing the research, the filming, the editing. But this film was finished in 4 months. And I got a previous editor who just happened to be available for 2 weeks. I had to do narration myself, and including the final narration of the film, I had to do in someone's garden, and I didn't have a cinematographer. And so I had to set it up on a tripod and face myself. It was like, and yet when people, I got not only standing room only, we turned away 250 people that day with no
I remember.
commercial, no advertising.
Uh-huh.
And I got a standing ovation. And one of my opening remarks was, who ever heard of an interfaith event selling out?
Yeah.
But you know, I don't know whether you remember, nobody wanted to leave afterwards. We had a reception in the lobby of the theater. Everybody felt they were kindred spirits. They were, Nelson Mandela's granddaughter was there that day. There were all these people shaking hands and hugging, and they didn't want to leave. It was like a cocoon of understanding and harmony. And
it
I
was
thought,
the first of its kind, really, since at least 9/11,
right,
where people were looking for that brotherhood, and you brought everybody together under the same roof. We call that the parking lot dialogues, where no one wants to leave, right?
right.
Where have you been my whole life? Well, I've been right here in the same community as you.
So once the film was finished, I took it on the road. I went to college campuses all over the United States, but I always made it a point. And even at that event, I had 5 musicians from all different parts of the world.
Yeah.
I had an Iranian singer. I had Pakistani girls dancing. Yuval Ron from Israel. I had Musa from Jordan, Stephen Longfellow. We had a whole representation of music throughout, and I understood that when you talked about my connection to the arts, it's because the arts are a tuning fork for us, Sandy. And so every single event I ever organized, I always brought a musician with me or found a local musician, and we started with music, so that everybody was vibrating together. Before you deliver any kind of intellectual message, you want to make sure everybody is entranced, right?
Yes.
To the place where they're going to hear.
Right.
And so I did that for quite a number of years. And the next call I got, right? And I thought that was it, that I was going to be traveling, showing the film and creating events. And I helped to form the Southern California Parliament of the World's Religions. And that I was co-chair for 10 years. But just before I left and stepped down, this amazing thing happened. It surprised everybody, including my family, because on my walks, I started hearing music and lyrics. And I had written some songs in my lifetime, but it was not something where I ever consider myself a songwriter or a musician. But I would come back from a walk, I would write up the lyrics, and I would remember the melody, and I would call friends and I would say, hey, I just wrote this song. And they said, well, why? And I said, I don't know. And this kept happening. And then Yuval Ron, who's a professional musician and composer and who won an Academy Award, a friend of mine, he said, you have a musical there. And I said, I do. And then it started to make sense to me. And I figured it out, Sandy. I didn't know, again, you're taking steps and you don't understand where the steps are leading.
Right.
But the moment he said that to me, and this you talk about your allies in the book, right? Something crystallized, and I understood that God did not choose a musician to bring this message to the public. God chose someone who had been involved in the interfaith community, who knew about them, about the different religions, who loved bringing them together, and who understood that we were not represented yet on the stage. We've never seen a musical about ourselves in all our splendor, what I call celebrating our grand cultural and religious diversity. And so I was being used as a vehicle. And so these songs kept coming in, 30 songs later, I said to myself, this is not coincidental. There is a plan here. And I thank you for letting me be the vehicle for it. I would not have thought of this on my own, but now that it's coming through me, I know that this is a way to reach mainstream. That's something we always talked about, Sandy, in our
sure.
Because the movement is growing exponentially. We know that. There are more interfaith groups today than there've ever been in the world, but we're still not there yet.
We're literally preaching to the choir, pun
Right.
intended, and
Right.
not. We are
Right.
literally still, we haven't broken outside those circles of influence. And I was so tired of going into the community and having people agree with me. I wanted to see heads like, yeah, okay, I don't need to tell you something you already know. I don't need to just, qualify your belief of interfaith understanding. Give me someone who doesn't understand and is willing to kind of stretch the edges of their understanding to kind of go there. This is why we did the weekend of community service. So we came up with this idea at Sarah to create a weekend of community service as covert interfaith cooperation, right? So we put people together from the mosque and the synagogue to pack boxes for the homeless shelter or clean the beach or do I think we had 100 different service projects going on with about 1,000 different people. And we even made a competition of it, a co-opetition between churches and mosques and synagogues and gurdwaras, and the mosque just totally creamed us all. They outpointed us all. And they said, well, we just won, we won the compassion games. What did we win? And we told them, you get to go to the synagogue next year and help them beat you. So we had a lot of fun with this covert way of doing interfaith. Yours, though, your gifts, and this is your gift, Aristotle says, your calling, your gifts are where the passions meet the needs in the world. And here you had this passion for filmmaking, this intestinal fortitude to tell the stories that needed to be told. And this, the needs of the world to understand interfaith reconciliation and to make it to the hearts of those who, will listen to a Broadway ready production. And I love your background, Broadway Bound on the Wings of Peace. It's just so great.
You're making me think of something that happened along the way. You see, that arranger I hired didn't know that much about interfaith. He's from Lithuania. He came to the United States as a young kid, and he studied in a Catholic school because he was Catholic, and nobody knew about Lithuania, so they all thought he was Lutheran.
Oh.
So he worked with me for 2 years before I released the first album. He arranged all my music for me. And a year after we released that album, he called me and he said, because things had changed in the world and people were starting to learn more about interfaith struggles, right? And the warfare between communities, and people didn't know them. He called me a year later and he said, Ruth, I didn't really know what we were doing when I was working on this music. I had a great time with you producing this and arranging your songs, but I didn't know what was behind it. He said, now I know. And one of the singers that I got, who's a professional singer, I asked my first singers to record for me without any pay because I didn't have the funds to do it. And they all said yes. But at the time when I asked for her release to be signed, she said, well, let me think about it. And she sang her first song. And after she heard the lyrics to the song, what if when you awoke, you were wearing a stranger's shoes? Mm-hmm. What if when you awoke?
What if when you awoke, you were wearing a stranger's shoes? What if when you awoke, you shared your enemy's extremist views? What if when you awoke, you think coming out black and white? What if when you awoke, you could imagine not being right? What if we all could see the beauty of one expanding humanity?
She sang the first verse and she came over and she said, where's that release? I'm signing it. She said, I know what you're doing. So there were people that would not have been involved in interfaith at all or known about it, that because of the art side of it, because of their aesthetic side, came into the project. And in the process, they were, I'm going to use a funny word, they were baptized with interfaith. And they started to understand that I was trying to send a message through music and through lyrics. And that's what started to happen with the song. People got wind of it and were so excited. And one of my first investors, who was a Unitarian minister, when she heard the music, she got up, she ran down the aisle where I was sharing the music, and she said, I want to invest $1,000 to bring this to Broadway. She said, I have never done this before in my life, but this play has to be seen. And something moved her. And then other people, started coming forward, and from different countries too. I heard from Switzerland, from England, from Germany, from New Zealand, from India. They said, when is the play going to be ready? Because everybody, once they knew that there was a way to talk about this subject in music and not head to head, that there would be a different response to it, that people would intercept it subliminally.
Liminally. This really speaks volumes about our culture, the fact, and I love that you brought up, the What If song. I love that. What's the title of the song?
What If When You Awoke?
What If When You Awoke? I knew I didn't have the whole title. I love that you brought that up, because that reminds me of sort of this, what Riane Eisler calls a domination trance that we all are walking in right now, that things are just the way they are because they've always been that way. Muslims are this way and Jews are this way, but what if they weren't? And that space between realizing that perhaps it's not that way, and then coming to the intention and the will to consider it being a different way, is a liminal space. So how do we recognize those moments that we are walking through a trance? Because look what happened to you, Ruth. What if Ruth dismissed what that house mother said?
Right.
What if you just let your rabbi put you into some housing? But no, you were like, wait, your calling was coming.
Well, I want to share something with you, Sandy, because I found these two quotes that I thought your audience would really appreciate about answering the call. And this first one is from Sarah McCrum. The spirit is what calls you to be you.
Yeah.
To stand in your shoes and to have the authority and power and agency to make a difference in the world. That describes you. And that describes me and anybody else who has answered the call. All right, now listen to this. Is from Carl Jung, the psychologist. The energy of the central point of the psyche is manifested in an almost irresistible compulsion and urge to become what one is. That's the entelechy of the acorn for the oak tree. It's already in there. Yeah. We don't know that. And we have intimations of it when we hear a certain call. And the real question of our lives is, did we answer the call?
Right.
Not did we hear the call?
Exactly. And when you do, and you're at the right place when you do, because you're lighter than air, right? You're in the zone. Things flow. Your movie that normally takes years takes 4 months.
Right.
Things just happen for you. Allies show up.
Right.
And your soul is dancing and you're free. And I think you're right. I think everybody has a seed in their pocket. Everybody is encoded with this gift, with that spark, at the center of your universe is your coding. And it's not just a responsibility, because I think we all have a responsibility, especially right now, that, like you said, that we are all in our authentic power.
Agency, she said. We have the authority and the power and the agency.
And I love the word integrity, not in the judgy sort of the word, not in a, I'm not your integrity and your moral choices, integrity meaning your wholeness, the integrity of who you are. Because when you're in your integrity, you can just lose that which no longer serves us. This is why intergenerational ancestral trauma work is good to do. This is why meditations that bring you to a heightened sense of awareness. This is where, and by the way, all of the skills in the book are all practices. And these are things that, like you and I, a lot of this stuff may come naturally. There's a lot more that I need to practice. So, you know,
that's like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice.
yeah, exactly.
Listen, I want to point out something that we're both Jewish, and in my life, Hebrew has served as not just as a language to read prayers, but as a language of inspiration. And so I always try to think of, when I hear a word in English, I try to think, what is it in Hebrew? And in Hebrew, what's beautiful is that there are usually 3 or sometimes 4 letters, which are the root of the word. They're not the word, but the root. So what you think is the word in Hebrew for integrity? Do you know? It's shleimut.
Oh, okay.
And in the word shleimut is the word shalom, which means peace.
Beautiful.
So in order to have wholeness, you need to have inner peace. You can't be integral, like you talk about the different kind of integrity, not whether you're trustworthy or not. You can't have wholeness unless you have inner peace. So within the word is the secret, lies the secret to what the word actually means.
I love that. And, you know, we have a mutual friend in Rabbi Dr. Terza Firestone. And she does amazing programs and workshops on intergenerational ancestral healing, and as well as Jewish ancestral healing. I think she's saying we have a lot of baggage. We do. We have a lot.
You know, everybody has.
Everybody does.
I signed up for her last course.
Yeah.
And in our first breakout session, there were 4 women. They were of all different backgrounds.
Right.
Maybe one other woman was Jewish, but the Christian, all different parts of the country. And we all noticed, we thought we came from dysfunctional families. Yeah. Well, I think the norm is dysfunction.
Right.
In terms of how do we get along with one another? How do we coexist? If we can coexist in our families, how are we going to create peaceful coexistence in the world? So the key to everything is in family and ancestral healing.
And to recognize some of these patterns that we carry that we may not even be aware of, that could have come from ancestral trauma or certain behaviors that no longer serve us. You know, the way my parents dealt with and thought about money created a huge hang up for me. You know, they're depression people. So I grew up in a condition of scarcity and lack until I realized that, and I unpacked it and then dissolved it. Abundance is, you know, how I operate now. And I'm blessed to say that that's no longer a condition that I live in. And yet it took the intention and the time and the practice to recognize that what if I had ancestral right? That's why I love that song. What if I have, you know, what if this comes from something I can heal? And then have awareness.
And also, what if it comes from something that I don't even know about that I can heal anyway if I go through a ritual for healing? Because that's one of the key attractions why so many people feel magnetized to do the course, because even if you don't know specifically what happened to your ancestors, there is a way to enter the liminal space of healing, where when you set your intention and you create an environment for healing, it not only heals you, it goes back 7 generations and forward 7 generations. And I know Indigenous people believe the same thing.
You know, I asked great-grandmother Mary Lyons why she calls herself great-grandmother when all of the other Indigenous grandmothers call themselves grandmother. And she said, because I am the bridge between the last 7 generations and the next 7 generations. And so that responsibility is so important. And I think about, you know, I had this experience in Auschwitz, and that is actually what chapter 12 is about, where I heard the voices of the victims that perished in Auschwitz. I heard them say, mourning us does not serve the greater good. I should go back if I'm going to quote myself. We choose love. Of course, we choose love. And I think about my ancestors' trauma. I think about their hardships. I think about how they struggled through deserts and crossing oceans and working, their fingers to the bone. So I could be here today talking about being in abundance, right? And it's my responsibility to honor them by healing that and of showing up in the best version of me because of what they gave me, good and bad. And so
you're bringing it again to the personal story, and that's something
Yeah.
I wanted to, for a moment, go into about the musical, because the songs aside, people always say, we love the music, what's the story? And I was coached, because I'm a filmmaker and I had never written a play or music before. I was coached that the story had to be a human story that was so captivating that the songs would be an encapsulation of the passion of the characters. They explained to me that in a musical, someone sings when they cannot say the words. They have to sing. And so I thought about that. And so the story ends up being about a Jewish woman leader in the interfaith community whose daughter falls in love with a son from the indigenous community. And even though she's all for bringing people together, she doesn't want her daughter to marry someone who's not Jewish. And likewise, the father of the indigenous young man is also equally committed to not having his son marry out of the tribe. So here you have the human story again. And the real question is not just the intergenerational conflict between the young people who see the future and are in love and feel that love will conquer all and they'll be able to solve all their problems through love. But you also see people who are entrenched in a certain point of view, which it's so hard for them to leave behind because of a cultural, historical, traditional imperative. And one of the songs, not all the songs are fun and lively, there's some heart-wrenching songs in the musical. And one of them is, what if my children go astray?
Right.
What if they find another way? Right? What happens to my family tree? What happens to my legacy? And the daughter sings, what if I cannot bring them home when I have children of my own? What of my own integrity if there is no room to be me? So these are human issues, and they're within the purview of a interfaith community and people struggling to figure out how to solve these issues with different faiths showing up. And so the story, if you took away all the interfaith trappings, could be just another Romeo and Juliet story, Fiddler on the Roof, that kind of the father is in charge, and then suddenly the daughters are doing what they want, and the world is at war. But the story is universal, but the language is specific, and we need it now. And that's what people say to me. This is a musical we need now. And I feel this is my greatest calling. This is my magnum opus. And this is what I was called to do. And my great hope is that when people have a theater experience, they will be moved by this story, and they will be moved by the idea that we are truly a universal people, and that God, it says this also in the Quran, God, Allah created everybody to be different intentionally so that we could come to know one another and learn to live together. So we were intentionally created differently, like the flowers of the field. That's God's plan. And if you look at nature, if you've ever been to the rainforest and you see this amazing canopy, green canopy, that when you look at it closely, right, you see hundreds, thousands of different species, right, cohabiting together. And you say, if God created us and we're in God's image, if God created nature in God's image, why can't we, for heaven's sake, learn to get along?
Well, and more, and even if you look, I love that you use the analogy of the forest and all the species and all of the different varieties, and they're so vastly different, and also, you know, in some cases, different colors. They're also mutually supportive on one another.
Even
Provide
even the
shade and
ones
sun.
even the ones that are parasites, the host tree allows them to grow on the host tree, the parasites.
Sure,
And
yeah.
those are somehow, they made an agreement. They were gonna
Right.
cohabit.
Yeah, we can sure take a lesson from nature. And yeah, I think we know that it's fear that keeps people apart. It's been an absolute honor for me to be an interfaith and to be alive at the same time as you, being an interfaith so close to you, and been on a lot of adventures with you. You know, all over the world, actually. We got, speaking of nature, we walked through the Melbourne botanical gardens. We talked so long that we almost got locked in, that we couldn't hear ourselves over the cicadas, that they made so much noise. But they were telling us we better get out or we're going to get locked. We'll be sleeping here in a foreign country, in a, you know, amongst all kinds of, you know.
So that's another kind of call you have to answer.
Well, that's all about sacred listening to what's going on. Ruth, I can't hear you when you're standing right next to me. But yeah, and like I said in the beginning of this call, that so much of my life's experiences, including, you know, seeing Indigenous peoples, you know, manifest a hailstorm in 99% humidity in Guadalajara, or our trip up to Northern California, where I first uttered the story, and ever since then you've been urging me to tell the What About the Dog story and write the book. I hope you're okay with it now. It's done. Who knows
I'm
what's
delighted, and I'm so happy to see you thriving as an interfaith leader, and especially all the work you've done, not just for women and girls, but in your inclusiveness of the Indigenous community, because that's also part of the message of the musical and the work I've been doing, is that we can't have token representation. We have to have inclusion on an equal level. And they have so much, it's not equal in the sense that they have so much wisdom to offer us that we've been ignoring for thousands of years. And this is the moment for catch up, not catch up, but catch up,
No,
where we get to learn and understand the deep, profound respect and connection they have for the earth and everything in it. And there's one song that I will just tell you, it's called Everything is Sacred. And
Everything is sacred. Everything that has a name. Everything is sacred. Nothing is profane. Everything has purpose. The Great Spirit has a plan. Everything around me reminds me of who I am. Kaletaka. I am Kaletaka, guardian of the tradition. Everything is sacred. That is what our fathers taught. Everything has meaning. Nothing is for naught. Everything is sacred. Mother Earth and Father Sky. Everything is sacred. How we live and how we die. Every word we speak, every mountain peak, every bird that soars, every beast that roars, every tear we shed, every wound that bled, every path we tread, everything, everything, everything is sacred.
You know, everyone that I can draw a line to the book
Yeah,
is here.
that's
and
a
I'm
good way
just
of putting it.
gonna-
That's a
Yeah.
great way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's
Those
really
are the-
important. I
Those
cite,
are the power lines, you know?
they're the
like-
power lines in our Indra's net. And everyone who has contributed to the book, I want them to have a voice here because I don't take credit for these skills. I take credit for acknowledging them and applying them to my life and then
But also integrating them in a way
integrating them.
that through a story, because in the
Yeah.
end, this is what I was told. When you go to a conference, right, and you are particularly moved by one person and someone asks you later on, what do you remember? You will only remember their personal story. You won't remember all the points they made, but
Yeah.
having your personal story interconnected with the skills,
Yeah.
right, is a way for people to desire to want to not just approach, but master the skills. Because otherwise it's just 10 ways to improve your reading and, you know, in a week.
No, and I want to be really clear because the skills, what's unique about this is that the skills collectively work as a unit, but they're not, you can toss some skills that don't work for you. You can add your own skills that you know that do.
Right,
What
right.
matter, there's a couple of linchpin, like, you know, skills that are really like, I consider them actually bonding agents to all the others,
I like
you know,
that,
like
I
the
like
trust
that.
frequency or, you know, sacred listening and applying timefulness. Those are some skills that are necessary. But when you start to apply them all together, we have a tendency to only like respond when things are convenient and comfortable with skills that are easy to access. But when you practice them as a cohesive unit, they're like their own medicine as one. And it's like when you put them all in a petri dish and then you bake it and you get a pill. You know, it's its own medicine and it's
You make it
comprised.
and you get a baby.
You get your mother source, baby source,
Right.
whatever, but it's definitely, you know, it's.
So I want to give you
yeah.
a blessing, Sandy. Okay. All right. My blessing to you is that the words you have shared and written have a life beyond your imagination, that they touch the hearts and the minds and the activities of the people who read it, and that you can create a larger liminal space for that to happen as a result of their understanding your message.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I love you. Thank you.
There's a field out there beyond all right and wrong. There's a field out